The sales conversation. I'm excited to show you this segment for our video series today because I am here with my good friend, sales guru, trainer extraordinaire, marketing person extraordinaire, Mr. Greg Marshall. And we are going to walk through a few things today that will really help you in having the conversations where you get to the heart of what counts, which is actually making the sale so you can get on the stage and have the chance to do what you do. But before you get on the stage, you have to be able to close the sale and get the yes. So that's what we're here to talk about today, Greg. And I think for many of us, we love to speak, we love to talk.
Yes.
But we're much more comfortable having certain kinds of conversations as opposed to others. So what is something you can tell us about, first of all, maybe the mindset we need to have going into having a sales conversation?
Yeah, when you have a sales conversation with a potential event or someone that wants to hire you, the biggest thing you have to think about is what value are you going to bring to their audience, right? And what is it that person, the person that's in charge of hiring you, what's the end goal that they want to achieve? So is it they want to improve, employee retention or motivate their staff or motivate their team or whatever their audience is? You need to know exactly what it is that individual would like to accomplish so that you can personalize and tailor your sales message to that.
So I've heard a lot of people talk about this in the terms of pain points. You want to figure out what their pain is in order to know what you can then bring to them, or in order to be able to help them see what you can bring to them. Hopefully you know what you can deliver and what you can bring. So how do you do that? How do you help bring out the pain points to move that conversation forward?
Well, it's going to be all about asking the right questions. So I recommend anyone that's going to sell anything, sit down and write a list of what I like to call power questions, which are questions that are designed to pull out the biggest pain points that the individual may have, right? So you could say as simple as, what are you currently struggling with right now? Where do you think you're not fully optimized or efficient in yet? And then have them really talk about it and go deep in the question. So don't take the surface answer of like, oh, well, we're struggling with, employee retention. Say, in what way? What do you think is causing people to leave? What do you think is the reason people are not enjoying the work environment, or why are they not motivated? And get very, very in-depth answers, and that's how you're going to be able to get the pain points that will help drive your sales presentation.
So you don't want to just ask the question and then give your content. You want to ask the question and then go deeper and deeper until you can get to the heart of the matter. And then do you provide your content? At what point in time in the conversation do you say, oh, well, here's what I can do for you? Walk us through what that looks like.
Yeah, so typically I recommend a 3-step sales process. The first step is kind of the discovering the pain points. You're going to spend about 80 to 85% of your time on that. Then you're going to move into step 2, which is the demonstration, or your content in this case. That's where you're going to spend about 10% of your time, and really it's just kind of reinforcing how your speech will help solve the problems that you discovered in step 1. Then in step 3 is the close. Okay, this should only be like 5%. If you do step 1 and 2 very well, it will not be very hard to close. And so the key is to spend almost all of your time in step 1, which is discovering the pain points, and then give them a little taste or a snippet of what you have to offer so that it still builds enough curiosity to want to hire you.
So if we need to be able to talk to a potential client about how our content can help with their pain points, obviously that means we need to understand how our content can solve those pain points. So that's one thing that you need to make sure that you know is, what is it that I do that will help solve their problem? Not why should they hire me because of this great speech that I give or this fabulous story that I can tell, but how is what I'm going to bring to them, how is that going to solve their pain points and help them solve their problem for their people? Is that right?
That is 100%. And the biggest thing when it comes to selling, a lot of people have a hesitation to sell because they're afraid of maybe the rejection or it feels uncomfortable. But I want to challenge you to think, if you focus more on how can I sell to help and how can I serve this person that's in front of me, it should eliminate most of the anxiety, because it's pretty tough to think about someone else and you at the exact same time, right? And so if you struggle with the anxiety of, it just feels very uncomfortable, like the spotlight is on me when it comes to the selling part, try thinking about, how do I just sell to help? how do I just go ask the right questions and focus 100% of my focus on them? Then you'll notice that your anxiety will drop and you'll be a lot more effective in your communication.
So my good friend Phil Jones has a program called Exactly What to Say, and he talks about the power of words and how using the right words makes all of the difference.
Yes.
And one of the things he says is that you shouldn't use the word cost or fee or even price. He says always use the word investment.
Yep.
Because there are certain connotations that come with the word investment. And when you make an investment, you also, that comes with the assumption that you are going to get something in return.
Yep.
So he says use the word investment when you're talking about things that you have to sell, products and services you have to sell. So my question for you now is, at what point in time do you bring up that investment? When do you talk about the fee, that's not a fee, but it's an investment?
Yep.
When do you bring that up in the conversation?
So typically you can start, so in step one, as you're discovering their pain points, you want to bring up that, of course, it's going to cost money, but what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're bringing this up. Do not be afraid. A stellar job of this is how it could solve your pain points. And then there's this little voice in their head before they transition from step 2 to step 3 that's like, okay, now here's the big ask. What I recommend is when you bring up the investment cost, what you want to do is basically just kind of a run-on sentence past it, okay? For example, you don't want to do this. Okay, Jody, it's been great speaking with you. Okay, so the cost of this program, right? Using the word cost, taking too much time in between. So you go, well, this sounds like this is going to be a program that's going to work very well for you. So the investment to work with us is of $10,000, and then what you're going to get is this, this, and this. And I really think, do you notice how I just put the number in there and just went past the number?
So there was no stop and focus on it.
Exactly. That's what you want to avoid, because using the word investment, you can even use the word cost or cost money. That's okay. But the key is how you're delivering it. You want to make sure that you're not making it a big deal.
Okay, so do you present them then with just one investment price or cost, or do you give them options? What is a good way to do it so that you are getting as much as you can out of it and that they're going to get what they need out of it?
I always recommend that you have multiple price points, and the reason I recommend that is because, and think it through, right? Like you want to, because if you give them options, then it allows them to choose one of them. You can use what you call the option close. And so if you just give them a yes or no, like here's the investment, you want to do it? Well, now you've put them in a position to where they're more likely to say no than yes, because there is a cost, right? But if you say, well, we have a couple different options, I think this one would be the best for you, but then I also have this one that's maybe a little bit lower cost and one that's a little bit higher. People tend to pick the one in the middle.
The one in the middle. Okay. So from my perspective as a speaker, I think if you want them to get the one in the middle, that means the reality is I want to put out options where maybe the middle is my sweet spot, where I'm getting everything I want out of it with that middle option, knowing that even if they chose the lower option, I'm still going to be okay. And if they chose the higher option, it's just icing on the cake.
Exactly.
Okay, so to get them to a point where you can close and get that big yes, are there other things you can do throughout the conversation? I've heard about like micro commitments, being able to get like small yeses, small agreements throughout a conversation, that when you get those small yeses, that leads them to a bigger yes. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so micro commitments are very important. You have to be crafty with how you use them, because you don't want the customer to feel like you're tying them down too much.
Okay.
And setting them up, right? What you can do is this. Ask them in step 1 all of their pain points, and then to get them in the yes mood, when you transition from step 2 to 3, where you're going to actually ask for the investment, right before you just restate everything they told you and they'll say yes.
Okay.
And that's how you get them to micro commit, and you don't necessarily, it doesn't feel like you're tying them down, or kind of, it doesn't feel like it's a tricky situation. It just feels like it's very natural, right? It's like,
because you're really just mirroring what they already said to you.
Exactly.
You're restating it. And when you can recognize, when they realize that you know their pain points, of course they're going to say, yep, that's exactly what we're going through. Okay, so that's a great way of doing it. Are there other things that we should need to know?
Well, I think when it comes to your presentation, I highly recommend you write out a list of power questions and write everything down. I'm a big advocate of write it down, because although you might think you remember it, or you have a great memory, or you've got this dialed in, what this will actually help you do is it'll help you be more creative with your sales presentation. You'll actually be able to be more engaged with the person when you're memorizing kind of the key questions that you want to ask and you're going through a structured process. If you don't do that, the tendency is to think, what will I say next?
And you're thinking about what you're going to say instead of thinking about what they're saying. So you miss out on some
Bingo.
of that. Okay, that makes sense. So I have heard suggestions that you should actually script out some of these things ahead of time, and even that you should have your notes there. And tell me what your thoughts are on this, but I have been told, it's been suggested to me that you can have your notes there and even mention to them, hey, I'm taking notes to make sure that I don't miss anything that you're saying. And that then gives you permission to both write things down as well as to look down at your notes.
Yep.
And then you can use those notes as a cue to remind you of the things that you want to make sure that you say, of the questions that you want to ask. Do you agree with that?
100% agree, because what that's communicating to the person that you're speaking with is that you're paying attention to the details, right? And that you're actually engaged and focused on what they're saying versus, we've all, talked to people where it feels like, are they really listening? Right? And if you saw them write it down, you would feel like they are versus they're just kind of taking in what you're saying and anyways, this is my cost to do that, right? And that's not a very effective way. So write it down, and it's okay to let them know, like, I'm going to ask you a set of specific questions that's going to allow me to understand your situation better. So I am paying attention to what you're saying, but if you do see me writing stuff down, that's what I'm doing. And if you just basically prep them for what you're going to be doing, they'll receive it much better.
So you let them know, just like you might have an agenda for a meeting, here's what's on our agenda. If you let them know, here's what I'm going to be doing, this is the structure of the call that we're having, and here's what I'm going to do so that we can both get the most out of it.
Exactly.
Then it will prepare them as well as give you permission to both take notes as well as to look at your own notes so that you can cue yourself on the conversation.
Exactly.
So a few other things that I have practiced and I know about the sales process is that before someone is going to buy something or commit to a purchase, they have to feel good about what they are going to be buying.
Yep.
So tell me about the importance of getting someone to feel something before they're willing to make a commitment.
Sure. So people buy off emotion and justify with logic. And so it boils down to the types of questions that you're asking in order for them to feel a specific way. So you want to make sure you're asking deep questions. For example, if you're selling to a group that maybe we'll use employee retention as a key point that they want to solve, right? You would ask them so what are some of the challenges that you're running into, and how does that make you feel when people are, let's say, resigning or quitting in the masses, right? Or
so the how does that make you feel is a big part of the question.
Yep.
Because you have to get to that emotional response before they'll ever make the mental response.
Exactly. Right? And so you ask questions such as, what's the perfect scenario in the future that you would like to see? And then they will give you a scenario and they say, now what does that feel like? Well, it feels a lot better. It feels a lot.
How would you feel if next time you hired someone, they stayed and they became loyal and da-da-da-da? So you word it in such a way that you're allowing them to give you that emotional response so that when it's time, that they have emotionally already gone there and they're ready to make that commitment for the investment.
Now let me add something to this, because if you're someone that's maybe more introverted, or you feel like you've been taught you shouldn't ask too many questions, this is what you want to do. Tell the individual that you're asking the questions to, I'm going to ask you a series of questions that helps me understand your situation better, and it may seem like they're irrelevant.
Okay.
But I need to know the real feelings, problems, challenges, and what motivates you to change in order to do my job at the highest level. And then you go into asking the questions so that you're pretty much framing it in a way where the person now knows why you're asking such deep questions. Because sometimes the person on the other side doesn't get why do you need to know how I feel when people leave? And you need to let them know, I need to know how you feel about that because I need to understand what needs to change and where I need to focus on.
So if you've been able to do this step correctly, you get to the heart of how they're feeling, what the emotional pain is, and maybe even tie that emotional pain to a monetary figure or a goal lost or some negative thing. So then you said you come in step 2 and you present your content or you do a demonstration. What does a demonstration look like? What does that mean in context of a sales call?
Yeah, so if you're doing a sales call or if you're in person and you figured out all of their pain points, then what you would say is, I'm going to design this speech to solve the following problems that you told me. Employee retention, feelings of anger when people leave or whatever, right? And then in the demonstration, you kind of just show them what your content will be and you tailor it to the problems that you need to solve in their specific organization or group.
And one of the ways that you do that, I think, is by telling them the experiences they're having. If you can say, oh, if your people are disengaged, if they're leaving too early, that probably means that they are doing X, Y, and Z.
Exactly.
And when you can show them that you know what they're going through, they're going to say, oh my gosh, they get it.
Yep.
Then, as you present that content and say, here's what I'm going to do is do this X, Y, and Z, really what you're doing is answering those specific pain points.
Exactly.
Is that right?
That is correct. And the key is when you go through that, it's about how confident you say it. And we hear the word confident, like, be confident when you do it, but it's maybe a better word would be more assertive.
Okay.
Of what you're going to do. So an example would be, so it looks like your company is struggling with these 3 things based on what you told me, and we have a solution for that, or I have a solution for that. And the way I'm going to fix it is X, Y, and Z. And in my experience running into this issue, these are the best 3 steps that we should take in order to do it.
So when you say, and I'm going to help you fix that, do you tell them just what you're going to do to fix it, or do you tell them what the outcomes are going to be if you fix it?
You can do both. So I'm going to fix that, and this is what you will see, right? So it gives them a visual of like, oh, okay, we're going to fix the problem, and this is what I should expect to see.
So you're telling them that you have a solution, and that when they implement the solution, here's what they can expect afterwards.
Exactly. And if you want, another challenge that I think speakers may run into is being afraid of asking what they really want, right? The true price that they want to get from the customer.
Why do we do that? Why do we have a value in our heads, and then when it comes down to it and the moment of anticipation comes and you have the opportunity to put that investment price out there, and then all of a sudden you question yourself, you double check, and then you lower
the price,
the number that you had in your head.
Yeah.
Why do we do that?
So one of the reasons is if you've never sold it at that price yet, you don't have the confidence that people will actually pay it.
Okay.
Right? So that's number 1. Number 2 is we would call it selling out of pocket. Maybe you personally don't have that yet in your own bank account. Therefore, it seems like it's a very large number, right? That's another a common reason in beginners, right? Like
if $200 an hour is a lot to me, then it's going to be hard for me to say someone else should invest $200 an hour.
Correct.
So I have to recognize that my personal beliefs and feelings on the investment is not the same way that a potential client should, because they should be looking at it from the perspective of, this is actually going to save me a ton of money if I can retain these employees as opposed to having to hire new employees. So I can't associate my view on $200 an hour,
exactly.
Whereas the reality is worth to them $20,000 an hour, because that's what they would be saving through this investment.
Exactly.
Is that the way to look at it?
That's exactly.
So how then do you, when you get to that point in the conversation, how then do you, buoy yourself up so that you're ready to put out the investment that is really where you should be?
Well, there's a couple of ways you can get around. Number 1, you want to make sure you practice role play with, it could be a friend, a spouse, or whoever, but you want to practice asking for the number. And typically what I recommend is asking for a much larger number when you're practicing. For example, let's say you want 10,000, you would say, so in order to work with me, it's $1 million. And you desensitize yourself to the number, okay? That's one way to do it. Another could be you hang around other people that are commanding these prices, right? Because then typically what you find out is you're severely undercharging. That's what you find out.
Okay, let's chat about that for a minute. What happens when you undercharge? When you present your prices too low, what does that do in the client's eyes?
It discredits you, right? And they'll actually view it as are you actually good at what you do if you're only charging that much? And so you want to be careful with that, because especially if you're trying to command the larger numbers, you need to say it confidently, but you also need to price yourself correctly, because people tend to view, like, if you, let's say you've only gotten $1,000 for your speech, and that's the highest you've ever hit, and then you go to and talk to Microsoft and they want to hire you, you say, yeah, I'm $1,000.
$1,000?
They're going to say, hey,
kidding.
thank you, we really appreciate your time, and we'll reach back out to you, which means
nothing.
They're never going to call you back again. What's going to happen is they're going to view it as like, it can't possibly be that quality if they're only charging $1,000. So what you have to do is you have to challenge yourself to go, I'm going to ask for a large number, and then if you have to negotiate down, remember I said you have multiple price points? Then if you have to negotiate down, you can get to the middle, which is probably the number you really want anyways. So you just want to, pricing is very important because it's basically how you're positioned in the marketplace. You could be the same exact speaker. We see this all the time. You see other speakers that are getting huge fees, and you're like, I'm just as good as that. They don't have more diplomas or more credentials than me, but they are sure making 40 times more than I am.
Yes.
And it's not because they're better. It's because they basically have the courage to ask for the larger number. And that's usually, the simple answer is just ask for it.
And one thing that I have found, and it's super applicable to me, is people within a certain price range are going to seek out others within that same price range. So if you're only getting something in a certain amount, that's because that's the level where you've established yourself. Yep. And when I was able to kind of make my jump from being an intermediate novice speaker to actually getting price tags that were worth my time, it was because someone came in and said, well, you're pricing yourself all wrong. Yep. You're not asking nearly as much. And they had me triple my highest amount I'd ever received. Yep. And that was their starting out point. They said, because people who are looking for this level of speaker are looking to pay this much. Yep. And if you're only charging this much, then they don't think that you're ready. You don't have the credibility. So if you're not pricing yourself according to a corporate budget or a Microsoft budget, then certainly you're not going to get a Microsoft type client. So you do have to get to that point. And you and I have actually had this conversation before, and he gave me a little bit of therapy and said, the reason they're coming to you is because they like what you do now. So don't feel like you have to go and make a bunch of changes or upgrade what you're doing. If you're having the conversation, they already know enough about you that they're interested in what you are doing. You just need to be confident enough to know that you have the value and you can deliver the value to them to solve their problems. So I love this conversation. We're going to script out a few of these deep questions that Greg talked about and give you this 3-step process so that you can go through and look at it and maybe script out questions for yourself. Is there any last bit of advice you would tell speakers as they're going into a sales conversation?
Yeah, my advice is spend as much time as you possibly can selling yourself that what you have to offer is incredible. Okay, that will help you tremendously because you have to believe in what you're actually offering and delivering, and you have to, the more confident you feel about what you're doing, the easier it will be to do the 3-step sales process because you'll inherently know I've got a great product that I'm offering them and I can't wait to share it.
Great. As one little side note, another quick question is, what about having other people sell for you? Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, you can definitely, if you're someone that you just would prefer to focus on your craft, then you could definitely find someone else that can sell for you. It's almost like an agent, right? And the agent obviously would make a commission off of it, but guess what? There could be some big advantages to that because the agent it's not as personal to them.
Okay.
So they could ask for way more money and not be afraid because they're speaking on, it's a weird thing that humans have. It's like, if I'm selling someone else, if they say no, they're not saying no to me. They're just saying no to them. So therefore, it kind of takes the fear out.
That personal rejection piece out of it because it's not you they're saying no to, it's just part of the process. Whereas I might take it as a very personal no if they didn't end up buying me. You're not going to take it that way on my behalf. Exactly. You're going to say, this is part of the process. I have to make this many phone calls in order to achieve this. Are there any downsides to having someone else sell for you? And at what point in time would you recommend it or not recommend it?
Yeah, so there would be a downside if the the person's value system isn't congruent to yours,
Okay.
or if they're overselling what you're doing, or just the way they represent themselves. One thing you want to make sure is if you have someone else selling for you, especially if they're selling you, you want to make sure that there's someone that is respectable and professional, right? So that as they're representing you in a positive way. And it's not like someone just showing up and, this guy's a little bit, he's on edge and he doesn't communicate well and he's unprofessional.
So they need to have more than a script. They need to know enough about what you do and have the confidence within themselves to represent you in the right way.
Exactly.
And be able to say what you would do in the situation, even though they're not speaking for themselves.
Exactly. Yep. So that would be the one downside is if you have someone who's selling for you that's not congruent with your value system and kind of the positioning that you're in. But there's also like we talked about, there are a lot of upsides because they won't take the rejection as personal, and so because of that, they'll be able to ask much higher prices. So you may be able to make more by just having someone say, yeah, you want 10, well, I'll charge 15 and I'll take 5, you keep 10, right? Or you pay them 3 and you make 12. That's another way to get around the fear of like, am I charging too much or can I get that amount of money? So so you should look at different scenarios and see what fits you best, but there's definitely upsides to having people sell for you.
Do you need to be at a certain level before it makes sense to have people sell for you, or is it more along the lines of whether or not you're comfortable for it, or some combination of both?
I think it's more of, as long as you feel like your speeches are strong, then you can hire someone immediately, right? Because you could just pay them, just like sports agents. They don't make a salary from their clients. They make a commission. Now, it's a very good commission, but they make a commission, and that's, so you don't need to have like money in the bank to pay this person because they would only get paid once they sell something for you.
Okay, that's a great way to think about it. So we hope that this conversation has been helpful. Hope that you get a few tips on both the sales process and the mindset behind it, as well as the conversation you can actually have and some questions that you can ask to script so that you can be confident and go out and get that sale.